So let's jump right to it. What is inaction? This is inaction if we leave in place our food system with its externalities to human health, to the environment, to biodiversity. That cost is at least $12 trillion. And the UN Food and Agriculture Organization SOFA report just came out with this number. Food Systems Economics Commission supports this same figure as well. Compared to that figure, the price tag for the regenerative and agroecological transition is likely 250 billion to 430 billion. So this is not cheap. No one here probably thought it was, but it is vastly smaller than that 12 trillion. Okay, so let's talk about where is the money in the system? Do we have resources already prepared to be activated for this? And the answer is yes. So compared to this 250 to 430 billion, what we find right now is we're looking at about $44 billion in investment that exists, that's flowing right now through the system. So what I want to do is break that down for you. Currently, less than $1 billion of that financing is coming from philanthropy. So roughly 700 million coming from philanthropy to support the regenerative transition, which we believe will cost up to 430 billion a year. Top that philanthropic commitment, BFIs are putting in about 3 billion. Next to them, we're seeing private investment at 11.4 billion. So again, much larger than philanthropy. But all of that is actually outweighed by the size of the public contribution coming in, which is right now about 29 billion. Okay, so $44 billion a year right now are actually working in support of this, which is good news because it means what we're talking about here is not starting from scratch, right? Money is flowing. And as we'll hear from leaders like Juan Carlos Shintiak of the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities, the good start on this transition goes back hundreds, thousands of years, actually. All right, so let's get a little candid about where philanthropy stands in this transition. Across the board, all philanthropic giving to food and agriculture sits at about just over 3 billion a year. Okay? So what we're seeing when we actually examine this funding to ask how much of it is really supporting agroecological and regenerative approaches, what percentage of that? We actually found it's quite small. It's about 300 million a year. So our ask on behalf of philanthropy is to see at least a tenth of this amount of funding going toward the regenerative. This is a real step change from where we are. Okay, now let's look at the public investment. And this is where, again, I think there's a lot of hope to the story that's being put forward by these findings from the draft initiative. What we see is that there is so much money, as I think many of us know, going into food and agriculture. In fact, the global subsidies about $635 billion a year. But here's the tough part of that news. The majority of those funds are actually pushing against this very transition. We found we're talking about 385 billion of the global subsidies actually make this transition incredibly hard, especially for landscape stewards and farmers. However, there is indeed this 29 billion, which according to our calculations really does support the transition. All right. So the big upshot of what we found and what we'd like to kick off this panel around today is we're really calling for 5 changes to financing to regenerative. First is more. We need to see more dollars flowing to the regenerative and agroecological transition. We want to see these increase by 10x. Second is we need deeper dollars. What do we mean by deeper? Compared to some flavors of regenerative that are more shallow, focused just on soil health or just on greenhouse sequestration, we want to see deep regenerative where we're looking at biodiversity, at water, at soil, but also at human beings, the well-being, territorial integrity, the community cohesion, equity for the people growing food and maintaining the environment in which it is grown. We want to see grounded dollars. If we look through the lens of indigenous people and local communities, 0.7% of donor investment, period, that's actually to landscapes that are stewarded by indigenous people. So we need to see these dollars actually get to the ground because right now we've built elaborate pipes and not a lot of water is coming out of them. 4, we want to see flexible dollars. Context matters tremendously. There's no one flavor of regenerative. It looks different. It requires different kinds of partnerships, different kinds of capabilities, depending upon what is being grown, who is growing it. So we need the capital to also meet that need for context specificity. And last, and this is why it took the Global Alliance for the Future of Food and this new creation raft of 22 philanthropies, we need to work in a coordinated way. We need to line this up so we can do more together. And we need to see that philanthropic capital unlocks 20, 30x from private investment, 40, 50, 60, 100x from public investment. So, what can you expect next from this effort that we're talking about here that's hosting this conversation? We're now turning the corner on this effort to go from the research, which we brought into the room today, to really prototyping what joined up acceleration models look like in real places. And so we'll be looking to engage all of you in that exciting next chapter for this initiative. Ultimately, there is no time to waste. And as you're seeing, while it's so exciting to acknowledge the 44 billion flowing, we need this to increase to 430 billion. So with that as a scene setter, I'd now like to introduce the incredible panelists. We're doing just a little bit of a mix up here in terms of our conversation, and maybe I will just scoot myself momentarily right here so I can sit with all the colleagues. Thank you so much. All right. Now we're going to start with you, Michelle. Michelle is coming from the MacDough Foundation, which is in Australia. It's a really exciting foundation that focuses on climate change, on communities, on health, both in Australia and the United States. MacDough has a lot of experience in regenerative. And I know, Michelle, that you focus so much on how regenerative differs by context, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the unique need for testing and piloting different approaches in different contexts and what you're learning at McDonald's?
Thanks, Sarah. So that's exactly right, and I think we are a foundation that is deeply focused in this space. We've done everything from funding small organisations that do peer-to-peer network learning. We've done open source, short supply chain type projects to try to boost the market for regenerative agriculture. We're trying all sorts of interventions, but our most significant one is a program called Farming for the Future, which I think to your question earlier is what is the role of philanthropy in kind of accelerating this change? And we saw a very clear gap around some pretty universal needs. So even though regenerative agriculture looks different everywhere in the world because of the policy environment, because of the natural environment, the social environment, adds and all the different inputs into a system. One thing that we learnt very quickly and that we see to be a real point for change is to understand the economic case. And the economic case is something that a farmer in the global south needs to know, and in the global north, and a very small farmer and a very large farmer. How do we make regenerative agriculture investable from the ground up is the most important learning that we've had. The second most important learning, I think, is language. The way we talk about transitioning agriculture really matters. Regenerative agriculture in many contexts is not a term that sits comfortably. And if we want to shift conventional agriculture at pace and at scale, we need to frame up the argument, which is fundamentally an economic argument, in language that makes sense and finds a common ground. So language to us really matters. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is working with unlikely allies is really important. Creating a very broad church around the partners that you see as being instrumental, whether they be an enabler or a barrier to change, finding that common ground and bringing them into the tent to see a transition that people might describe in different ways, but ultimately everyone knows that what sustainability looks like today will look very different in 2, 3, 5, 10 years' time. And everyone has an interest in supporting agriculture to thrive in that time horizon.
This cues up the next question I wanted to ask, which is I know you're investing in strategic communication around regenerative. What this context is so varied?
I think that's it. It's investing in understand. So my background, incidentally, is in marketing, and I found that in doing this work with a range of very diverse partners, that means also involving agencies, policy advocates, building a team, and really investing around in communications piece around change has been one of the most key ingredients to all of our work.
Brilliant. So, to close, how do you see an effort like this alliance of foundations amplifying the work at McDock?
Look, it's for us. I think one of the amazing things about philanthropy around a transition that looks a particular way, we come at the problem in to see the dollars that the raft has revealed to us are really important, I think, for communicating the magnitude of the challenge that we have. What we also need to be able to use that for is to communicate the opportunity, you know. And I think using the big numbers to then ground truth those to the business case for individual farmers to know what is it going to cost me to transition? What are the supports that I will need to be able to continue farming and thriving for the generations to come? I think being able to draw the connection to the macro, right through to the micro, has been one of the most important things that the RAF will enable us to deliver, and also to get an understanding of how we as funders can collaborate more deeply, can survey the space and understand where we have really clear gaps. So I think it's going to be a really important framework for us over the coming years to develop our programs.
Thank you, Michelle. And now I'd like to turn to Juan Carlos Ginciac. Juan Carlos is the Executive Secretary of the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities. He was the former UNFCCC Indigenous Caucus co-chair. He was recently shortlisted for this year's Nobel Peace Prize. An incredible human being. Juan Carlos, countless, yes, that does deserve applause. Countless indigenous practices and a long tradition of traditional ecological knowledge really have paved the road to come to this moment where language describing something like regenerative is drawing an audience of this size. And yet we know this concept comes by many different names, deep expertise of knowledge. What does it look like? What are the mechanisms? What is the best way of engagement?
Thank you thank you very much. Um, First of all, always when we have the way to present the voices of the indigenous people and local communities from the ground, we have to memorize or remember the elders, the leaders that they've been walking for a long time, a long walk to bring that demands and the voices from the roots, from the ecosystems, or rainforest, different ecosystems. So that momentum's help us to be civilized because sometimes our voices are not visible in different regions with all the challenge that we have, especially when as indigenous people we do the effort to get together as a community. When you get together as a community, is the first point I just want to make solidarity, because you have solidarity with different other groups, and then you have a goal over there. So that is that you have to secure resources, you have to bring your demands, and then present that demands with your part of your culture. How is your culture? People will understand from the outside. So the collaboration to bring your voices from the you are connected from the ground. The people has to understand, because sometimes it's difficult to transmit who you are, because sometimes you are different. You are using feathers, or you have some other people are walking around. And yeah, yes, I am indigenous. I have ecosystem culture for immemorial times, generation by generation. That transmitting that connected with the point that you questioned me, that is for us on the ground, we have this manner to have our dialogues daily during one day, 2 days in community. Nobody is on the behind. All the voices are important. Elders, the youth, generation by generation. So you see the ecosystems, you see the rainforest, so you see the food. I mean, everything is for us. We are connected as a one. We are part as a one. So that concept about knowledge or millenniums of the knowledge system. Each indigenous group connected with each ecosystem of tropical, we need to transmit to the paper with that we have our own plans of life. That plans of life, this is a documental to present. This is the way how we want to connect and to work in the partnership with different other actors with a lot of respect and the context of the human rights as a person, as individuals, or as a collective.
It's so profound what you're speaking to, both the transmission and the sharing of the plans of life and the invitation that I hear in your comments, Juan Carlos, which is an invitation for the governance mechanisms that enable those conversations and that sharing to happen in a way that supports rights first. And that's so important. Why, from your perspective at the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities, why is philanthropic action needed to align the resources required for indigenous foodways, regenerative and agroecological approaches to flourish? And how do you hope to work with this kind of initiative in the future?
For us, respect, to listen and to listen what are our demands in the context with the mother earth, because the earth has the rights. We understand that it's difficult to interpret, but we understand the spiritual connection with the earth. That the right is immemorial for many centuries. This is something difficult to transmit, but if you listen to us in the context of the rights, it's easy to go to the next step. You bring in the next step, when we talk to philanthropy, you bring this uh, positions that what we wanted, how we need to work in the collective. So there's another way to say we work in collective. So this is something in solidarity, collective. That perception that brings me to the next point, that we are losing these value symbols as a human person, that we need to reconnect us. We are the people that we are connected as a human sentiment with the forest, because we talk with the forest. We cannot separate. It's not just water there. It's not just tree there. We are part of this holistic way. I am connected to that. I hold it. And this is a spiritual connection. There's no values. There's no way to interpret that. So the last point maybe here to put it here is that, yes, we do a lot of challenge. The Global Alliance with territorial indigenous from the in the tropic areas, we are overlapped with the 24 countries, and then we are coming here, my brothers are coming here to follow with the negotiations here in the UNFCCC. And then it's important to mention that why we are here, what is our demands, and this is opportunity. We need to change the vision, but I hope in the future, what I'm mentioning here is that we are preparing to change a country with us. The science recognize that, because the 80% of the all biodiversity is in our hands. All this is where we live. I mean, this is scientific institutions, they recognize of how we make applicable to that, in what language. So that is the challenge. And maybe my traditional language on learning Spanish and speaking in English, or maybe future I will learn Dutch or German, they will official language. But the point here is that we did a lot of effort. We need to recognize that my elders, the women, all these indigenous groups, we are working in collective, Afro-descendants, local community, indigenous people. But the message here, the center of the message, we don't need to lose hopes, because we we as persons is more powerful than the money. The money is very important. The money has to canalize directly with the people are living and giving the life in the territory, on the ground, in that beautiful ecosystems, or contribution to fight this crisis. Thank you.
Such incredible words. And at the center of what you're offering, Juan Carlos, is a very high bar for philanthropy and for all of us to engage in this space with a spiritual connection, first to each other and to the land of which we are a part. So thank you for reminding us and bringing that into the room. I'm going to turn to Mary. Mary Erongo. She's the Policy Advocacy Manager from Pelham in Kenya. This is a membership network that promotes agroecological principles among smallholder farmers and pastoralists. So, Mary, thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about the work of Pelham, and how does it recognize the importance of regenerative and agroecological approaches?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. As you have mentioned, Pelham Kenya is a network of civil societies who have come together promote agroecological practices. So for Pelham Kenya is part of the regional association that is in Eastern and Central Africa. So in Kenya, we have 61 civil societies who are promoting agroecological practices and reaching to about 1.1 million Kenyans with agroecological practices. As Pelham Kenya, we promote agroecology to enhance the adaptation and resilience of smallholder farmers who are mostly affected by climate change. And this is the opportunity that we have identified that can build the resilience of smallholder farmers, and recognizing that in Kenya, 80% of the land is arid and semi-arid compared to the other 20%. So identifying a practice that will enable production of the food and build the resilience of the farmers at the same time, and ensuring that beyond production of food, that farmers have money in their pocket is our key work at Kenya.
It's incredibly important work. So, what are you seeing? The 1.1 million Kenyans that are already a part of this transition, what is actually happening on the ground? Can you paint a picture for us?
Okay. Kenyans through the member organization. In Kenya currently, I can say that there is a momentum that has already kicked in terms of the transition to agroecology. And starting from the policy environment, for example, currently Pelham Kenya, in collaboration with Intersectoral Forum for Agroecology and Agrobiodiversity, are formulating a national agroecology strategy, which is in very advanced stage, and maybe next year we'll be launching it. And also at the decentralized government or the local government, we have county government that have already come up with agroecology policy, agroecology act, for instance, Murang'a County, and they're already in the implementation stage. And beyond Kenya, we have Tanzania, who have already launched their ecological organic agriculture strategy. Uganda, they are also developing a national agroecology strategy. So in terms of providing an enabling environment